Hello and welcome again to the Writer Review. This is Eric Carrot Writer, and this week we're going to be taking a look back at the 1973 supernatural horror movie, probably one of the, sometimes often dubbed as one of the scariest movies ever made. And we're talking about 1973's The Exorcist. Now the runtime for The Exorcist is 2 hours and 2 minutes long. Yeah, I know for a horror movie 2 hours might be too long, but there's a lot of good story that's told in this, so buckle up. You're going to be there for 2 hours long. A little over 2 hours. It is directed by William Friedkin, who also went out to direct another very successful movie 2 years prior, and I'm talking about The French Connection. The script was written by William Peter Blatty. The novel it's based off of is The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty. It is produced by William Peter Blatty. They say this movie is inspired by actual true events. Although, of course, for dramatic license, there's going to be a lot of exaggerated stuff. We'll get more into that. It is composed by Jack Nitzsche, the cinematography by Owen Roisman, and it was edited by Jordan Leondopoulos, Eben Lotman, Norman Gay, and Bud Smith. And the stars of the movie are Ellen Burstyn, Linda Blair, Max von Sydow, Jason Miller, Lee J. Cobb, Jack McGowran, Kitty Winn, Father William O'Malley, Barton Heyman, Peter Masterson, Rudolf Schundler, Robert Symonds, Arthur Storch, Father Thomas Bermingham, Vasiliki Maliaros, Titos Vandis, Ron Faber, and Mercedes McCambridge, who is the voice of the demon Pazuzu. Plus, we also have cameos from William Peter Blatty, a former radiologist turned demented serial killer. I'm talking about Paul Bateson. Yes, if just to add on to more of the creepiness of this movie, they actually hired a serial killer. Well, he would later go on to become a serial killer. This was before. He was still just a well-renowned radiologist. His name is Paul Bateson. And the face of Pazuzu was done by Eileen Dietz. So away we go. Coming up in October, it's going to mark the 50th anniversary. Yes, it's hard to believe it's been nearly 50 years since the greatest horror movie ever made, The Exorcist, had made its debut. And today, it still holds to this day as one of the most disturbing, grotesque, but very provocative horror film that was ever made, and that the shock value still lingers on to this day. I mean, there's been, of course, a lot of stuff that happened in front of the camera, but also behind the camera there has been met with a lot of deep-rooted tragedy. Yes, I mean, from what I've heard, people who came into this movie also ended up getting psychologically traumatized by the images that were seen. Maybe it might be tame by comparison, but back then, this was a game changer in the horror genre. And I think that was actually deliberately done by William Friedkin. The shock value comes from the fact that this movie seems to be more closer to reality than compared to all of the other horror movies that was coming out, which was mostly based off of camp. From the eras of Vincent Price and Peter Lorre, to guys like to all the movies from the Hammer film eras that had featured prominent Hammer film actor Christopher Lee, and all the movies that was under the direction of Roger Corman. Well, now Friedkin has decided that it's time that we make horror movies more genuine, more authentic, more realistic, and something that could actually generate scares instead of just camp, instead of just, campy monsters, or just practically lampooning the horror genre and making people more entertained than actually scared. This movie scared the shit out of a lot of people back then. Did it scare the shit out of me? I've been an avid movie watcher for many, many years, and one thing I could tell you, very little does put any frights to me. But I could seem to understand it. A lot of the scenes that was there are quite unsettling and very disturbing, and I can understand it. I mean, but the thing also to this movie that makes it all effective is its storytelling, its characters. We have characters out there that we genuinely care for. We don't want to see any of them suffer their fate. Maybe a few unlikables, but not very many. We actually kind of like a lot of the principal cast members, and I think they've all done a wonderful job. And I will go more into that. Although there are quite a few subplots, including several conflicted characters, which I will get to, there is still a connection to the primary focus of the movie, and that everything comes together for the grand climax at the end of the movie, and what a grand climax there is. So, what is the story all about? Okay, so The Exorcist focuses primarily on a young preteen girl named Regan McNeil, played by Linda Blair, who lives in a single parent household in Washington, D.C., or Georgetown, with her mother Chris, played by Ellen Burstyn, who is acting in a movie located in Georgetown. It's practically an actress playing an actress, so to speak. But we don't actually see that in the first opening scenes. In the opening scenes, actually, we start off in Iraq, where a bunch of archaeologists are doing some dig. And the archaeology team is led by a Catholic priest by the name of Father Lancaster Marin, played by Max von Sydow. One of the kids finds some kind of ancient artifact that resembles some kind of winged demon. Personally, I don't understand why is it that there's a priest at an archaeological dig. I mean, I know priests are intellectual and all that, but do they all have multiple jobs that they get paid for? Doesn't the clergy pay them? Or is it all just volunteer? That they all have to sort of embark on two jobs? I mean, Father Karras has a second job aside from being a priest. He's also a psychiatrist. Does that mean Father Marin also has a second job as an archaeologist? We also discover that Father Marin has done many, many exorcists, and it has taken its toll on both his physical and mental health, which is why he always carries around a case full of heart pills. Because let's face it, the guy is pretty much sickly and may not have the composure to conduct another exorcist. And we will get to that in a bit. And then, of course, the focus turns to Chris and Regan. And then, even right from the beginning of the movie, you hear this rumbling sound coming from the attic. And she tells her personal assistant, I think he's a butler, he's German, his name is Carl, to check to see if there's any rats in the attic. And then he's like, no, no rats. You know. Of course, Regan also has been, I guess you could say she's been a bit heartbroken because of the fact that her father, Howard, had separated from them. I don't know if they've actually officially got a divorce, but he did walk out on them for whatever reason. I don't know. But I know that Regan is a bit very deeply psychologically scarred by this whole debacle. And and yeah, she seems to be somewhat lonely because her father's a no-show, and her mother is also not always there with her because she's more occupied with working on her latest movie. So most of the time I guess she's homeschooled by the help around the house, like Sharon and Carl and a few other people too. And what does she do when she occupies her time? She plays board games. One of those board games also includes a Ouija board. And she interacts with some invincible manifestation who goes by the name Captain Howdy. Who is this Captain Howdy? I don't know. But whoever this Captain Howdy is may not necessarily be a physically great spirit. And then all of a sudden, once this whole thing had started, weirder and weirder behavior patterns have been happening to Regan. Something kind of unusual, strange things have been happening to her, from erratic behavior, including pissing all over the floor in the middle of a party, saying to the astronaut that when he goes into space, he's going to die up there. Her voice is changing. Her deformity is starting to take shape. She's suffering from erratic behavioral problems. She's even had unusual superhuman strength. Swearing quite frequently. And bizarre traits like speaking Latin and turning her head at 180 degrees. Doing a spider crawl down the stairs. She probably was responsible for the death of Chris's movie director. I think his name was Burke Dennings, played by Jack McGowran, who, by the way, this was his last movie he's done before he passed away. I think it was before the movie was released. I knew it was due to pneumonia or influenza during the time of the London influenza epidemic. And, all these weird behavioral patterns have been having. Her bed is shaking. She seems to have somewhat uncontrollable things. Many people might say this was all just, in contribution to her father's disappearance. And people might say it's psychosomatic. Well, that it's just a phase just to get attention. But then again, maybe it isn't. I mean, some of her erratic behaviors, things are just unusual. Chris turns to top doctors and therapists to see if they can find a cure for her unhinged behavior. But her madness goes beyond repairable, even to the world of science and medicine. And sure, people can say that this movie seems to be more heavily dependent on religion than science. It is revealed that Regan is not possessed by Pazuzu. It is revealed that Regan is possessed by a demonic entity named Pazuzu, who was a creature that was integral in Mesopotamian folklore. Fearing for the worst, Chris, who's not completely deeply religious, fears that I guess she has no other choice but to turn to the Roman Catholic Church and to hire priests to perform the ancient art of exorcism in order to save her daughter before it's too late. But of course, we really need to know if this is really necessary for priests to conduct an exorcism, because apparently exorcism is very, very delicate initiative and has to be done with the greatest of assurance. Does she really need to be exorcised? Because this is no joke if she does. These priests are not going there to fuck around. We need to actually know if she genuinely needs to be exorcised. Or is she just going through the motions of her parents' separation? But however, an exorcism is pretty much a last resort for her somewhat unhinged behavior. But you could see it all there. Even when her skin becomes all dried up and she's barfing pea soup and she's doing all kinds of other strange stuff like jabbing a crucifix through her twat and saying all these horrible things, and even sometimes mimicking the people who died. Like sometimes she would impersonate Bert Ginnings, or even Father Karras' mother. I'm going to get more into Father Karras a bit, because to me, he is probably maybe the most integral and maybe even the most developed character in this movie. So, fearing the worst, as a last minute resort, Chris decides to have these priests perform the Exorcist, fearing that she's at her wit's end. I know she wants to protect her daughter. I know she wants to be there with her. However, though, Chris is pretty much, I'm not going to say worthless, but somewhat powerless. And that she has to leave it up to the professionals. She's not a priest. She's not a therapist. But she is a loving, caring mother who loves her daughter very much. But what could she do? She's never performed an exorcist before, and it takes a lot of preparation to do it. Father Lancaster Marin, played by Max von Sydow, who has in the past been digging for ancient artifacts in Iraq, who is an expert in the art of exorcism, is sent to the task in spite of his advanced age and his declining health caused by heart failure. Yeah, I'm telling you, Max von Sydow really turns in quite a great performance. But he's not on a lot, but he is quite effective. One of the things you should also take into consideration is that his role makes him feel like he's so much older. He actually kind of looks a little bit like he would look in his later years. That's just how amazing it is. It's like the guy has always seemed to be somewhat cast as playing characters older than his actual age. If you actually look at the age of Max von Sydow in this movie, you'll be surprised to know that he was actually only 44 years old when this movie was made. But he was just so convincing. You often wonder, does he always seem to be somewhat typecast as being an old guy? I mean, it's almost like Abe Vigoda. He always looked frail and old in almost every show he was in. And he actually would die in 2011 at the age of 96, when yet he always looked like he was 96, even in some of his other shows. Max von Sydow looked old and frail in this movie, but he always seems to be somewhat typecast to play people older than his actual age. It's just that amazing. So under the assistants is Father Damien Karras, played by Jason Miller, who is also a licensed psychiatrist. Well, he's been also fighting demons of his own, not in the physical sense like Regan, but mostly in the psychological sense too. There's a lot of deep-rooted drama within his character. Obviously, I don't think priests get paid very well because while the McNeils seem to live in a nice, rich, elaborate home in Georgetown, Father Karras looks like he's living it out in the slums of Brooklyn. And, he comes home to a rather dilapidated apartment where he is joined by his mother, who he's looking after. Apparently, she suffered another one of her falls and is considering sending her to long-term care. But his mother is determined that she does not want to be put in a nursing home. She wants to stay in the apartment where she seems to be happy. But eventually he goes against her wishes and even doesn't even put her even in a nursing home. No. With the limited money that I guess he has, he and his uncle have absolutely no choice but to put her in a mental asylum. Like, jeez, that's kind of sad. And then his mother, of course, while she's dying, she just does not want anything to do with him. And then, of course, sadly, his mother would pass away, and he would eventually just lose faith in himself and lose faith in the church. I mean, the guy is pretty much very self-conflicted. He lost faith in himself, feeling responsible for his mother's death, assist him to vanquish the demon from her soul, and bring her back to the innocent child she once was. Like I said, this isn't going to be easy, and Pazuzu is just one tough son of a bitch to beat. The movie definitely is saturated with creepy, grotesque features like the iconic spider walk, the frequent vomiting of bile green pea soup type of substance, the girl levitating in the air, the iconic spider walk, the whole horrible things that she says, saying things like your mother sucks cock in hell, and fuck me, Jesus, fuck me. She's got quite the mouth, doesn't she? And a lot of people may have also been turned away from that effect as well. The suspense and the special effects are provided for fans to walk home to feel unsettled, uncomfortable, but most of all, it does leave a lasting impression, even if it's not necessarily a great impression. It's not often that a horror film gets a place in the Academy Awards, but The Exorcist was nominated for 10 Oscars, which included Best Picture, and was the second highest grossing film back in 1973. I don't remember which one was the first, but it really, really did. Yeah. Who says that horror films don't have a place in the Academy Awards? Many of films do deserve an Academy Awards, even if it is in the horror genre. Now, some people might say this is not a horror movie, but more closer to a psychological thriller. And they wouldn't be too wrong. But the reason why it's placed as a horror because it's got the supernatural elements to it. We have a demonic figure who has made residence in the body of an innocent young girl. It needs priests to get that demon out of her, even if it costs them their own lives. You have a relatively caring but somewhat helpless mother who just wants her daughter back and wants to go through all lengths necessary to get rid of whatever it is that's bothering her. She turns to therapists who really can't do very much, even though they do all kinds of other like medical procedures. Some of them was like, ugh. You have to go through such great lengths, but I guess they do anyway. And these kind of things is something that, yeah, this movie really, really does sometimes even questions our own sanity just to sitting there watching it. As a nod to the works of Alfred Hitchcock, director William Friedkin wanted this movie to be a psychological thriller in which there are some elements to the scenes, however, with the notion of some demonic presence lurking around, causing fear and harm towards those around it. Friedkin decided that a horror genre is quite sufficient to the story, and at the time, it is still to this day one of the scariest movies ever made. I think it still holds true to today. Okay, some of the stuff that's featured in there might be a little archaic to some clothing, technological features, and whatnot. And yeah, it makes me want to think twice before even playing with a Ouija board. And though horror films are still made to this day take great influence from this particular movie, it has often been imitated but never duplicated. Where this movie succeeded while many others have failed was that the filmmakers are more invested in using shock value to keep its audience amused. Jump scares are injected into the storyline to get their viewers' hearts pumping, but when it comes to storytelling, it's very minimal and not much intellectual merit is included. All you just want to do is just thrill the audiences with thrills, spills, and chills, and nothing more. This movie doesn't really just depend too much on that. There are still some cringe-inducing scenes, like when doctors start injecting needles through her neck to get blood samples. It's enough to make you wince just looking at it. I was like, oh, fuck, no. God damn it. That looked fucking painful. And there are some murder mystery scenes that relate to the suspicious death of Chris's director, Burt Dennings, played by Jack McGowran, and the dramatic tension belies upon the emotional and mental breakdowns caused by an evil, uncontrollable force who's made its residence in the body of an innocent child. I know the scare factor is what everybody will talk about once they've seen the movie. The weaknesses in horror genres are still bogged down by overdoing the special effects, resulting in poor dialogue, bad dialogue, and only half-baked character backgrounds. That's why the horror genre is never really ever taken seriously or into consideration by the Academy Awards committee. And these are like some of the top of the line cinema snobs who will only select the best. A lot of horror movies are not aimed for Oscars or for trophies for that matter. They're just here to scare you. Based on William Peter Blatty's 1971 novel The Exorcist, Blatty based his novel on a true event that happened in 1949, I should say, and it was to some adolescent boy who faced the same experience that Reagan faced here. Heavily dependent on character development and making every scene convincing, the film is not specifically for entertainment purposes, but to explore the unknown forces in our environment and to take caution of the possibilities that unknown evil forces are upon us, waiting to take control of our bodies. I think that's where a lot of the fear factor is that what has happened to Reagan, people might sometimes fear that it could happen to them. It may not necessarily happen to a child. It could also happen to an adult. It could happen to a senior. It could happen to anyone. That's kind of also the fear factor and the uncomfortable nature that you get. One minute you'd be just the average Smo going through your day. Next thing you know, you're possessed. And there's really nothing else that you can do about it but to hire an exorcist. And they're not going to do it for cheap either. Refreshing that the thought of conducting an exorcism is not the first thing that comes to mind in Chris's head. Even Father Karras thinks the idea is ancient and hasn't been practiced for centuries, and conducting one today can be quite a bit of an embarrassment. Because I don't think any other religious sectors, except for the Roman Catholic Church, practice exorcisms. And even the 1949 story, the boy that was possessed was not a Roman Catholic. He was a Protestant. I believe he was a Lutheran. But I don't think the Lutherans practice exorcisms. It's only practiced by the Roman Catholic Church. And very few times the Catholic Church ever conducts an exorcism. But just by that concept, it makes the movie feel very real. Yes, exorcisms are rare, almost practically obsolete. And some people could say that, Reagan's trauma could also be something almost in the similar veins to someone who has sleep apnea. They want to try to get out of something, but they can't because they're possessed. But unlike sleep apnea, it's not necessarily some evil force that's dragging you in, but just a situation that you want to get out of, but you can't. And sometimes it might take a lot to get out of. I mean, when it comes to the climax of this movie, it's one of the most exciting ones. I mean, both Father Merrin and Father Karras tried everything in their powers to get Pazuzu outside of her, even to the point where Father Merrin's heart failure and his health issues start to take its toll on him to a point where he would just die. Father Karras had to kind of pick up the pieces after, and he eventually ends up becoming the sacrificial goat, which ends up with him having to have the demon go inside of him, and I guess to prevent further trouble or for him to commit the acts of evil, he decides to throw himself out the window and onto those deadly long flights of stairs where he was laid to death. Yeah. Apparently, then, of course, this is a spoiler alert. Once the whole exorcism came over, Father Karras, of course, dies. But at least they saved Regan's life. Regan doesn't know anything at all what happened or what transpired. And I guess Chris and Regan eventually move out of their home, go someplace else. And of course, this eventually would lead to a bunch of sequels. I would try to avoid part 2, The Heretic. That will be no good. Part 3 is not bad, especially with George C. Scott taking over Lee J. Cobb's role as Lieutenant William Kinderman. And I believe Jason Miller does return as the possessed Pazuzu who's still inside of him. Sometimes he would go into like normal form, except for he's now played by Brad Dourif, I think. Yeah. And I think there were a few other ones too, which evolve around a younger version of Father Merrin. And I think they also had a TV series that lasted about a year. And I do believe they're going to have, I think, a reboot. And I believe Ellen Burstyn, at 91 years old, is going to be coming back as Chris O'Neill. We don't know if it's going to be a reboot or a remake or what it is, a continual series. But we'll see what happens. So by the time we reach the climax, we are given the exciting, epic battle between good and evil, and it's handled in a very professional and experienced manner. And though we have advanced over the years in terms of technology and CGI, The Exorcist has aged very nicely. The makeup effects by Dick Smith is held on quite splendidly, especially by Linda Blair, giving her the menacing glare, those demonic facial looks, and the flaky, pale skin, the long forked tongue, and the scary yellow eyes. And though only 44 years old at the time, Max von Sydow also got a makeover to look a lot older and frail. The smaller technical features also deserve some credit, including the lighting, the unsettling cinematography, and the use of more modern use of electronic background on the soundtrack. It's also handled at a professional level. But to this day, The Exorcist still holds a special place in the annals of horror film classics, and for that, I would give this movie, out of a scale of 1 to 10, I think it truly deserves a perfect 10 out of 10. I highly recommend you guys to see it. But don't expect your levels of sanity to stay with you for long. Maybe I'd suggest that after you see this movie, go watch a funny cartoon. At least try to find ways to sleep better. And don't worry. It's a 1 in a million chance that you're going to become possessed. And if you are possessed, do try to seek help as soon as possible. But I don't think it will likely happen. Just a word of warning. So I guess this ends my writer review. Thank you all for listening in. If you wish to subscribe to my YouTube channel, please feel free to do so. If you wish to leave a comment, go right ahead. But just remember the 3 simple rules: be kind, be courteous, and please refrain from any rude comments. And I will be back again with another movie review. So until next time, this is Eric Carrot Writer saying, keep watching those movies, and I'll see you around. Goodbye.